She was 18 and tired of apologizing for taking up space. Not angry, not rebellious, just exhausted. Exhausted from hearing doors close softly behind her. Exhausted from pretending the silence inside her chest didn't hurt anymore. For most of her life, Clara Bennett learned how to become smaller around people, smaller around arguments, smaller around disappointment, smaller around her stepfather, whose patience disappeared the moment bills started piling up. The night he told her to leave, it was raining hard enough to blur the streetlights outside the trailer park. "You're 18 now," he muttered without even looking at her directly. "We can barely feed ourselves." Her mother cried quietly near the sink, but never stopped him, and somehow that hurt worse. So Clara packed everything she owned into one faded army backpack and left before sunrise. For 2 weeks, she drifted through towns beside old railway lines, sleeping in bus stations and abandoned shelters whenever she could. Sometimes freight trains screamed through the darkness nearby, while she tried to sleep curled beneath her jacket. The sound always reminded her of her grandfather, Arthur Bennett, a railroad mechanic who spent 40 years repairing passenger trains before the rail company shut most of the routes down. When Clara was little, he used to let her sit inside empty train cars while he worked. "Trains remember people," he once told her. "They carry pieces of lives everywhere they go." Back then, she thought he was only being poetic. Now she wasn't so sure. One afternoon, while scrolling through local property auctions on a cracked library computer, she found something strange. Burned railway dining car. Condemned. $12. Pickup required. The photo showed a blackened train car sitting alone in a forgotten rail yard, surrounded by weeds taller than fences. Most of the windows were shattered. The roof looked partially collapsed. And near the center of the car, she noticed something odd. One section of flooring looked newer than the rest, not repaired carefully, almost hidden, as if someone had replaced it in a hurry years ago. People online joked about it, said the car was cursed after a fire decades earlier, said railroad workers refused to enter at night. Still, Clara bought it, $12, one signature. And suddenly an abandoned, burned train car belonged to an 18-year-old girl with nowhere else to go. But what she didn't know was someone had hidden more than memories beneath those ruined floors. And on her very first night, sleeping inside the train car, she heard knocking beneath her feet. Slow, deliberate, 3 knocks, then silence. Before we continue with stories like this, stay with you stories about forgotten places, hidden secrets, and people rebuilding themselves from almost nothing. Take a second to subscribe. And if you have ever felt lost or alone at some point in life, comment where you are watching from. Sometimes strangers understand pain in ways family never could. Backstory Part 1. Clara grew up beside railway tracks in a fading industrial town called Merrill Ridge. Most mornings started with train horns echoing through the valley before sunrise. The sound became part of life there, part of breathing, part of memory. Her grandfather Arthur lived in a tiny brick house beside the old rail depot. The place always smelled like coffee engine grease and cedarwood smoke from his fireplace. Clara spent most of her childhood there because her parents fought constantly at home. Arthur never spoke loudly, never rushed. He fixed broken things patiently. Pocket watches, radios, rusty train lanterns. Sometimes entire model train engines spread across his workshop table in tiny pieces. His hands were rough from decades of mechanical work, but strangely gentle when handling delicate parts. Every Friday evening, he cooked tomato soup, while old jazz records crackled softly through the house. Those were Clara's safest memories. Rain against windows, warm soup, train whistles far away in the dark. Arthur often told stories while repairing old railway equipment. Not dramatic stories, small ones. Conductors who secretly carried letters for lonely soldiers during wartime. Passengers reunited after decades apart. Workers sleeping inside freezing rail cars during storms. Railroads carried more than people, he once told Clara while polishing an old brass lantern. They carried grief too. At 11 years old, she didn't fully understand him, but she listened anyway, because Arthur made silence feel comforting instead of empty. Her grandmother Eleanor had been quieter, soft-spoken, always knitting near the kitchen window. She died when Clara was 9. After that, Arthur became lonelier. The workshop grew quieter every year. Still, he kept working, because fixing things was the only way he knew how to survive sadness. Then the rail company finally shut down the old passenger lines completely. Arthur lost the job he loved most, and something inside him dimmed slowly after that. Not all at once, just little by little, like lights going out in distant windows. Backstory Part 2. When Clara turned 14, her father left completely. No goodbye, no explanation, only unpaid bills and silence. Her mother remarried too quickly after that. Frank, a man permanently angry at life. The kind of man who treated kindness like weakness. At first he tolerated Clara, then money problems worsened. The trailer became tense constantly. Arguments over groceries, electric bills, rent notices taped to the door. Clara started staying longer at Arthur's workshop after school. The old man noticed everything without asking questions directly. One winter evening, while snow fell outside, he handed her a small iron railroad key. Heavy, cold, worn smooth from age. This opened maintenance compartments on older passenger cars. He explained quietly. Most people would think it's worthless now. Clara turned the key carefully in her hands. Why give it to me? Arthur smiled faintly. Because forgotten things still open forgotten places. She kept the key hidden inside her backpack for years afterward, mostly because it reminded her someone once cared about her gently, not because she believed it mattered. Arthur died during Clara's senior year of high school. Heart failure. Quick, quiet. After the funeral, the workshop closed permanently. Most of his belongings were sold within weeks. Train lanterns, tools, old records, even the cedar workbench. Clara wanted to save some of it, but there was never enough money, and eventually survival swallowed everything else. After graduation, she tried working grocery shifts while attending community college classes at night, but bills kept growing. Frank grew colder, and finally, the night came when he told her to leave. The worst part wasn't losing home. It was realizing home had already disappeared long before she walked out the door. Journey, the abandoned rail yard, sat nearly 30 miles outside Merrill Ridge. Clara reached it near sunset after riding 2 buses and walking almost 3 miles beside dead railway tracks. The place looked forgotten by time itself. Hundreds of rusted rails disappeared into weeds and fog. Broken freight cars leaned sideways like skeletons. Wind pushed softly through twisted metal. Everything smelled damp, burned wood, old oil, rainwater trapped inside rust. And there, near the far edge of the yard, sat the burned dining car, blackened, silent, half consumed by fire years earlier. Its faded railway logo barely remained visible beneath soot stains. One side of the train car had collapsed slightly inward, windows shattered completely. The metal door groaned loudly when Clara forced it open. Dust exploded through the fading evening light. Inside felt colder than outside. The burned ceiling exposed warp support beams overhead. Old dining tables still sat bolted to the floor, covered in ash and debris. Broken plates remained scattered beneath seats, like people once left in a hurry. Clara stepped carefully deeper inside. Her boots echoed softly across the floorboards. And then she saw it again. That strange patch of newer wood near the center aisle. Different nails. Cleaner edges. Not obvious unless someone looked carefully. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. The train car didn't feel abandoned. Not completely. More like something unfinished had been left behind. Night arrived quickly. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof, while Clara spread an old blanket across one booth near the back of the car. Wind howled faintly through broken windows. Somewhere outside, loose metal clanged rhythmically in the darkness. She barely slept. Then sometime after midnight came the sound. Knock, 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 directly beneath the floor. Clara froze instantly. Her breathing stopped. Silence followed. Long, heavy silence. Then another sound. A faint metallic ticking somewhere below her feet. Morning light revealed how exhausted she truly looked. Pale skin. Dark circles beneath her eyes, hands trembling slightly from cold and fear. Still, she stayed. because leaving would mean returning to nowhere. Over the next few days, Clara slowly cleaned sections of the train car. Broken glass, burned debris, old papers fused together by water damage. And the more time she spent there, the stranger the place became. Some doors opened too easily. Others refused to move at all. One storage compartment smelled strongly of cedarwood despite decades of decay. At night, she sometimes heard movement beneath the floorboards. Not animals. Too heavy, too deliberate. One afternoon, while clearing ash near the kitchen section, she found an old photograph trapped beneath a cabinet. Railroad workers standing proudly beside the dining car decades earlier. One man instantly caught her attention. Arthur Bennett, younger, wearing oil-stained overalls, smiling beside the train conductor. On the back, someone had written, Silver Crest Dining, Line 1983. Emergency Restoration Crew. Clara stared at the image for a long time. Why had Arthur worked on this exact train car? He never mentioned it. That night curiosity pulled her toward the newer floorboards again. She tapped carefully across the wood. Most sections sounded solid, except one. Hollow, very hollow. Her pulse quickened immediately. Using an old screwdriver, she slowly pried upward at the edges. The wood barely moved. Something locked it from below. Then she noticed scratches near one corner. Tiny marks beside a rusted metal plate. A keyhole, small, iron. Her chest tightened. Clara reached into her backpack slowly and removed Arthur's old railroad key. Her hand shook while inserting it. The key turned perfectly. A loud click echoed beneath the floor. Then silence. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, thud. Something shifted deep below the train car. Dust drifted from cracks overhead. Clara stepped backward, immediately heart racing uncontrollably. The floor hatch lifted slightly open. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of cedarwood machine oil and old paper. The same smell from Arthur's workshop. She almost cried right there. But before she could open the hatch fully, a distant voice echoed across the rail yard outside. Hey! Clara slammed the hatch shut instantly. A flashlight beam swept through broken windows. Someone was outside. The man introduced himself as Raymond Cole. Late 60s. Former railway security worker. Heavy coat. Tired eyes. He claimed he checked the abandoned yard occasionally for trespassers. At first, he seemed suspicious of Clara. Then he noticed the old railroad key hanging from her hand. Everything about him changed. Where did you get that? He asked quietly. My grandfather. What was his name? Arthur Bennett. Raymond went silent. For a long moment, he simply stared toward the train car floor. I knew him, he finally whispered. The two sat outside beside a rusted barrel fire, while rain drifted through the yard. Raymond explained that years earlier a fire destroyed the Silver Crest dining car during a violent storm. Officially, the cause was electrical failure, but rumors spread afterward. Rumors about missing payroll money meant for railroad workers during the company collapse. Money that disappeared the same night as the fire. Some people thought workers stole it, Raymond muttered. Others thought company executives hid it. Clara listened carefully, then asked the question haunting her most. Was my grandfather involved? Raymond looked away toward the dark tracks. Arthur was one of the few honest men left around here. That answer somehow raised even more questions. Later that night, Clara reopened the hidden floor hatch. Beneath sat a narrow maintenance compartment running underneath the train car. Metal ladders descended into darkness. Her flashlight illuminated old pipes, electrical, wiring, and wooden crates stacked carefully near the far wall. Someone had built this hidden space intentionally and kept it secret. Every step downward echoed softly. The air felt trapped, heavy with dust and age. At the far end of the compartment sat a cedarwood chest, untouched, perfectly preserved. On top rested an envelope with Clara's name written across the front in faded handwriting. Arthur Bennett's handwriting. Clara's hands trembled violently while opening the letter. The paper inside looked yellow with age, but the writing remained steady. Clara, if you found this place, then life probably became harder than I hoped it would for you. I wish I could have protected you longer. Years ago, after the Silver Crest fire, I discovered company officials hiding worker parole funds during the railroad shutdown. Money meant for families already struggling to survive. When the fire happened, they planned to blame dead workers and make the money disappear forever. I could not let that happen. So I hid everything here until the truth could surface safely someday. Most of the money belongs to surviving railroad families, but part of it belongs to you now. Not because you need saving, because you were always stronger than you believed. Tears blurred Clara's vision instantly. She looked toward the cedar chest slowly. Inside sat stacks of old cash bundles wrapped carefully in waterproof cloth. Gold watches, railroad bonds, employee records, photographs, and beneath everything else, Arthur's old brass train lantern, the one Clara loved most as a child. She lifted it carefully with shaking hands. Still polished, still beautiful. And suddenly the money mattered less than the realization crushing her chest. Arthur had thought about her long before he died, planned for her, trusted her, even when life made her feel disposable. Clara sat alone beneath the train car, crying harder than she had in years. Not because she was rich, because for the first time in a very long time, she felt remembered. Everything changed slowly afterward. Not magically, not easily. Lawyers became involved. Railway records reopened. Families connected to the missing payroll funds finally received compensation decades late. Raymond helped Clara navigate everything quietly. Some reporters tried turning the story sensational, but Clara avoided attention whenever possible. She used part of her inheritance carefully. First for small things, a tiny apartment, warm meals, new boots. Then something unexpected happened. She restored the burned dining car, piece by piece, window by window, not because it made financial sense, because the place had carried her through the loneliest part of her life. Local railroad volunteers eventually joined her, old mechanics, retired conductors, people who remembered Arthur fondly. Together they rebuilt sections of the rail yard slowly. Clara learned restoration, work using Arthur's journals and repair notes. At first she failed constantly. Metal warped incorrectly. Wood cracked. Measurements came out uneven. But she kept trying, because healing rarely looks graceful while it's happening. Months later the dining car reopened as a small railroad museum and cafe beside the restored tracks. Visitors came from nearby towns. Children explored the booths wide-eyed, while Clara shared stories about forgotten railway workers and old passenger lines. Sometimes late in the evening, after closing, she sat alone inside the restored dining car, listening to rain against the roof. The same sound from the night she arrived, only now it no longer sounded hopeless. Her mother visited eventually, nervous, ashamed. Their conversation felt fragile at first. Careful, human. People do not repair relationships instantly. Sometimes they simply begin by sitting quietly together. And for now, that was enough. Years earlier, Clara walked into the abandoned rail yard carrying one backpack and nowhere left to go. Cold, hungry, certain life had already forgotten her. But hidden beneath the burned floors of an old train car waited proof that something survived longer than loss. Not just money, not just valuables. Love, memory, legacy carried quietly through generations. Sometimes the world hides important things inside ruined places. And sometimes broken people are the only ones patient enough to uncover them. Late one evening long after the museum closed, Clara lit Arthur's brass lantern inside the restored dining car. Soft golden light reflected across polished wood and quiet windows. Outside, distant train horns echoed through the valley once again, and for the first time in years, the sound no longer reminded her of leaving. It reminded her she had finally arrived somewhere. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more emotional mystery stories like this one. And in the comments, tell me about an object, memory, or place that still connects you to someone you loved. Sometimes small forgotten things carry the biggest pieces of our hearts.